Got a new video here for you, and I want to get to it. But I want to get to a pet peeve of mine first. And here it is. I don't like it when people let their pets peeve on my lawn. Okay, not the best of jokes, but I'm not known for that. I actually have a pet peeve, though, I want to share with you. Here's what bothers me. I don't really like emojis very much. I know that sounds weird. I'm one of the few people who doesn't. I know people use them all the time. I personally try to avoid them whenever I can. I think you should be able to express how you feel by writing it out with words. Not everyone agrees. But I understand why these things exist, even though I don't like them. Here's why they exist. Back in the old days, when people used to text one another, before emojis existed, because there was a time, they would write something to one another, and maybe the way it was written out sounded kind of mean or nasty. And people often got confused about the message being texted to them. So we thought we'd get clever. We learned how we could use punctuation to make little smiley faces or little winks. And then eventually someone got even smarter than that and said, I'm just going to create a bunch of pictures that you could stick in there to put some type of emotion behind whatever the writing is. Okay? Good. Now, what does that have to do with this next part, road signs? Well, it's a similar process when you're driving on the street. I'm sure you've been with mom and dad in a car, and you notice all these wacky signs all over the road, right? They tell us to do all kinds of things when you're driving. They tell you to stop the car. The 95 in the middle, that lets you know what highway that you're maybe going to enter or you're actually on, okay? The little RR with the cross, that tells you a railroad sign's there. I have no idea what this guy's shoveling over here on the left side. No, that's not true. I think I know what he's shoveling. I've done it before. So you have all these different signs available to you on the road, and they're there for a purpose. They tell the drivers, so we don't run into each other, how fast to drive, what to do, what not to do, when to do it, where to go. Okay? They're road signs, and they're very helpful. The same thing exists when we're reading. You just don't pay that much attention to them anymore because you think you know them all. They're punctuation marks, and there's a whole pile of them. There's even more than I have here in this little display. But I'm going to zero in on just 3 today because there are 3 that I think are very helpful for you when you're reading something to understand how it should be read, how you should hear the voices in your head. Because I'm seeing a lot of kids making mistakes they shouldn't be making. And here's the first one I want to talk about. It's called the italic or italicized word. I know you've seen it. It's those really strange, slanted, thin words that show up sometimes, and it looks like it's a mistake, but it's really not. And there are 2 ways that we use italics when we're talking about voice inside of something we're reading. The first one is to show a character and what he or she is thinking. Now, sometimes the author just says, this kid is thinking blank, but a lot of times they don't, and they'll use the italicized print. The other way is for emphasis. So it says here, this line has a word with emphasis. Notice I said it louder. That's the point behind it. Below it, it says, this line uses emphasis for the last 6 words. I know I'm yelling it, but I'm trying to make the point clear. We use it when we want to emphasize something. And we do this all the time when we speak. You just don't pay attention to it. People emphasize words constantly. So italics. I got a little joke here for this next one called ellipses. Maybe you'll get it before I explain it. It shows a solar eclipse and 2 people are looking at it. You see the sun is up above with 3 little dots after it. That's an ellipses. This guy says, this is going on longer than I thought it would. Okay, so what exactly is the joke with that? Oops, sorry. The joke is that an ellipses is meant to show that you're taking a pause. And it can also show that you're letting your voice kind of trail off, okay? Somebody might say like, Miss Lagana, what did you do all day today? I say, well, I did this and I did that. And then of course I went and I let it go. I don't finish what I'm saying. That's in print all the time. People do speak like this regularly. So the joke is the eclipse is taking a long time, ... and it's being drawn out. So far I've got the italicized word, I've got the ellipses, and now we're going to talk about dashes. Dash it all? I know. This seems really weird, but there are 3 kinds of dashes that show up in print. There's the hyphen, which I think you know. You connect 2 words together that way, or if you have a really long word and it gets to the end of a page, we put a little dash, and then we continue on the next line. The N dash I'm not going to go into. It's the M dash I want to talk about. This guy here is a longer dash, and he serves a purpose. I don't know why he's a he, but that's what I'm going to call him for now. The M dash is used to interrupt something that someone is saying or you're saying. So this might be an example. I was hanging out with my friend. Oh, his name is Todd, by the way. And he was telling me, now did you notice how I interrupted myself? I said I was hanging out with my friend, and then I realized that maybe the person I was talking to didn't know who I was speaking about. And so I said, oh, his name is Todd, and I moved on from there. Okay? It's an interruption. Shows up in print. You should pay attention to it. Now, I have this story called Mr. Mason's Jars, and it's a short story, and I only have parts of the story, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of what it's about. There's a teacher, Mr. Mason. He's not well loved. He's a tough guy. He's just not a great teacher. And a new kid named Troy has come to this school, and Troy is a bit of a talker, and he doesn't really think before he speaks. And he's going to meet up with a girl, and the two of them are going to be in science class together. And this kid is going to get the attention of Mr. Mason. And he's got these special jars, which are kind of creepy. But I'm not focusing on the story. I'm focusing on how we read the story. Okay? I'm going to show you where these things show up in print and how you should be reading them. I hope. All right. No, let me come back here, please. Mason, Mr. Mason, was also tall with a woolly-looking gray beard and sharp eyes. He gazed down at Molly as his breath nearly melted her face off. Hi, Mr. Mason, said Molly. This is Troy. He's new. Troy was a rambling talker and had the misfortune of not realizing Mr. Mason hated talkative kids. Whoa, cool beard, Mr. Mason. I wish I could grow one of those. Maybe someday. You're annoying and loud. Please say you do not have third period science. Oh, I have it all right, said Troy, holding out a package of lifesavers. Mint? So I underlined right because what you're noticing here is it's got an exclamation point. That's one of our road signs, right? Somebody's excited about something, and Troy, the kid who babbles, he's very excited, and he yells this out. Let's continue. Mr. Mason snatched a roll of mints from Troy in one quick motion and scowled down at the boy. These are not allowed in my class. No candy, gum, or talking. Talking is underlined. It's in italics. It's emphasized. Molly started to drift away as slowly and carefully as she could, but Mr. Mason's gaze landed on her, and she froze in place. I've got my eye on both of you. I smell trouble. I think that might be your breath, Mr. Mason. It's really the only smellable thing in this general space. So yeah, Troy is a bit of a smart aleck. My kind of kid. Mr. Mason's face went white. His teeth moved inside his head as he ground them back and forth, and his eyes began to bulge. Just as it looked like he was going to blow his top, he turned violently and walked away. Why did you have to go and do that for? Said Molly, punching the new kid on the shoulder. You punch like a girl, said Troy. I am a girl, you moron. And do yourself a favor. Don't get on Mr. Mason's radar. He's creepy, and he hates kids like you. Now, you see that am is underlined? It's because it's italicized. And I read it the way it should be read. I didn't say I am a girl, you moron. I said I am a girl, you moron, because she's shocked about how obvious this comment is. Then later on, I underlined favor with the colon after it because the colon here is kind of acting like an M dash. It's not actually an M dash, but it's pretty close. She wants to let Troy know what he has to remember forever. She says, do yourself a favor. Don't get on Mr. Mason's radar. Okay? Let's go further. Mr. Mason hates cool kids? Troy's so clueless. Ha ha, said Molly, backing toward her next class as the bell rang. Don't say I didn't warn you. Guys like you take his class and they're never the same after. What does that even mean? And more importantly, would you be my girlfriend? Molly rolled her eyes, but she also couldn't help smiling a little. Troy was cute, and she met him first, before any of the other girls could claim his attention. Her smile fell away as she thought about Troy provoking Mr. Mason with his goofy sense of humor. I probably should have rated this PG-13. Okay, I think we're skipping ahead. Now we're in class, and Troy the motor mouth is going on in Mr. Mason's class. Just be quiet in Mr. Mason's class, okay? I mean it. Oh, sorry, this is actually right where we should be. But Troy was already headed in the other direction, waving at her and saying, "Relax, girlfriend. I'll buy you a soft pretzel at lunch. Meet me?" The question hung in the air. Then Molly nodded and smiled back, a bigger smile this time, and she turned into a sea of kids racing between first and second period. Do you see how there's a missing line? It's unbelievable how many times I have to explain to people that the missing line means that we are starting a new scene. Okay, it's not an accident. And so you should think that we're in a new location, a new place, or a new time when you see that. When Molly arrived at Mr. Mason's class an hour later, she tried to sit next to Troy in the back row. "You," Mr. Mason said from the front of the room, pointing a long finger at her. "Up here in front." The front row of Mr. Mason's class was the worst location in the entire school. Stale coffee breath hung on every word Mr. Mason said. And every one of those words was world-class boring. This one I know you know. All in caps means it's being yelled out. "Yo, Mr. Mason," Troy said from the back of the class, raising his hand but not wanting to be called on. Oh no, thought Molly. See that? Italics for thought. "What kind of cool stuff do you keep in those jars?" Troy asked. So we're skipping ahead now. It's actually later after class, after school. Troy's been invited to Mr. Mason's class to actually see the jars. Let's see how this plays out. "Whoa, that is one stinky jar of something. Puts your breath to shame." Mr. Mason twitched at the insult. "Doesn't it, though?" Mr. Mason agreed. It was killing him to be nice to Troy. The two had been opening some of the jars together for a few minutes. "What's in there?" "No, wait, don't tell me. It's a human finger floating in a pool of fish guts?" Now notice, we've got the dash. I underlined it. There's an M dash. He interrupts himself. He says, "No, wait, don't tell me," and then he jumps to his guess. "You're a very imaginative young man, Troy. Has anyone ever told you that?" "All the time, but seriously, what's in there?" Mr. Mason put the jar back where he'd gotten it. "Let's just say what's in that jar will melt the gum off the bottom of a chair in a matter of seconds." "Cool." "But not as cool as what's in this jar," said Mr. Mason, reaching back and picking up a glass jar filled with something sloshy and purple. "This is the real stuff. My own scientific blend of..." Notice, ... He lets his thought drift off, and it's full of intimidation and threat. There's something wrong with this jar. Mr. Mason deliberately let his words trail off. He liked to let his unruly students guess at the contents. "Your own special blend of awesome, right?" A typical answer full of annoying vigor and void of any intellect. Mr. Mason touched his temple. A very bad headache was having moved behind his eyeballs. Not to worry, he thought. This too shall pass. The thing about this one, and again, he lets his voice trail off. Okay? He slides the jar out and he lets the jar be in front of Troy, and he lets the jar become what he's interested in. But it's full of threat here. And again, ... Your voice trails off. I'm just going to read in the middle part here where it says, Troy grabbed the jar and he slid it close to his face. "This close enough?" he asked, so excited he could barely stand the weight. "Maybe a little closer." So now we get it all together. We get the ellipses and we get the italicized word put in place. And notice how it sounds. I didn't say maybe a little closer. I didn't say maybe a little closer. I said maybe a little closer. Okay? So here's what we're going to do. I want you to start paying more attention to those road signs in your reading because they're all over the place. I went over 3 specifically, the italicized word, the dash, and the ellipses. And I hope they help a little bit more when you're reading through things and trying to understand what's actually happening. And that's all I've got to say. Best of luck to you. And keep your pet away from my lawn.